The courtroom was quieter than I expected. My father sat across from me in a pressed shirt, the kind he only wears to funerals and occasions he thinks matter. My mother wouldn't look up from the table. And my sister, Stella, the one I had paid rent for, covered legal bills for, driven her kids to school for, sat with her hands folded and stared at a spot somewhere above my left shoulder. The number on the filing said $350,000. That was what they were suing me for. Reimbursement, they called it, for raising me. I didn't cry. I didn't lean over and say anything dramatic. I just thought about the stack of bank statements sitting in my lawyer's folder. 4 years of transfers, receipts, invoices, and I let myself breathe. They had spent years making me feel like I owed them everything. They had no idea I had been keeping records. If you've ever been the one who shows up quietly, pays without being asked, and still gets treated like the family inconvenience, this one is for you. Hit the like button before this is over. And if you're new here, subscribe. These stories don't get told enough, and you deserve to hear them. Now let me take you back to where this actually started. My name is Maya. I run a small pottery studio out of a converted garage space I rent on the edge of town. It's not glamorous. The heating is inconsistent. The floors are perpetually dusty, with dried clay, and I once spent an entire Tuesday repairing a kiln with instructions I found online at midnight. But it's mine. Every shelf, every imperfect mug, every cracked bowl I couldn't bring myself to throw away. Mine, and yes, I have a thing about chipped mugs. I keep them even when they don't match anything, even when they serve no practical purpose. People who come to the studio always notice them lined up on the back shelf and ask if they're for sale. They're not. They're just there. I could never quite explain why I held on to things that were broken. My sister Stella never had that problem. Stella threw things away the moment they stopped being useful. Growing up, the difference between us wasn't subtle. Stella was the one in the school photos my mother printed and framed. Stella was the one my father introduced first at family dinners. She was beautiful in a way that photographed well, and she'd built an entire life around that. A husband, 2 kids, a house with good lighting, and a social media presence that made strangers feel like they knew her. I was the other one, not the problem child, not the black sheep. Just the other one, the one who paid her own rent at 22 and didn't ask for help and was therefore apparently fine. They mistook my self-sufficiency for not needing anything. I let them. What my family didn't know, or maybe chose not to look at too closely, was how much of their stability had my name quietly attached to it. It started small, a few $100s here when my mother's car needed work, a grocery run I paid for when my father's hours got cut. Normal family stuff, I told myself. You help when you can. Then Stella's husband left. He walked out one Tuesday with almost no warning, and the life Stella had built, the one everyone had admired, collapsed in about 6 weeks. The house they were renting went into arrears. Her lawyer needed a retainer. The kids needed after-school care while she tried to stabilize. My parents were panicked, and they were limited. Their savings weren't substantial, and their energy went mostly toward managing their own fear. So I stepped in. Over the following 18 months, I covered $14,200 in legal fees for Stella's custody arrangement. I paid 5 months of her rent, $4,750 total, while she got back on her feet. I drove her kids to school 14 times when she had early hearings. I bought groceries, covered a car repair, paid a pediatrician bill she'd forgotten to mention, until the collection notice arrived. I never handed her a bill. I never sat her down and said, "You owe me." I just did it because she was struggling and I wasn't, and that felt like reason enough. I told myself it would matter, that at some point, the people who had always looked through me would finally see me clearly. That was my mistake. The first sign that something was off wasn't an argument. It was a tone. I was at my parents' house one Sunday, and my mother mentioned offhandedly that Stella was going to need help covering utilities for the next few months. She said it the way you'd mention the weather. No question mark at the end. No would you be able to. Just a flat statement of what was going to happen. I said I'd see what I could do. She said, "Good. I'll tell her you'll handle it." I remember standing at their kitchen sink, rinsing a glass, and feeling something shift in my chest. Not anger, exactly. More like recognition. The second moment was worse. A few months later, I mentioned to my father that I was thinking about saving up for a place of my own. Maybe something small. Coastal, somewhere I could have the studio and some quiet. He looked at me with this small, patient expression, like I'd said something slightly naive. "You don't have the same responsibilities Stella does," he said. "She has kids. She has real pressures. I nodded. I didn't say anything, but I heard what he meant. Your life is small enough that it can be interrupted. The third moment came when I overheard my mother on the phone with a relative. She was explaining Stella's situation, listing everyone who was helping. She mentioned my father's contribution. She mentioned what she had done. She did not mention me once. I had transferred $3,400 to Stella's account 11 days earlier. The call came on a Thursday evening. Come over. We have good news. Things are finally stabilizing. I drove over thinking maybe this was it. Maybe Stella had found steadier footing. Maybe I'd walk in and something would feel lighter. I walked into the living room. Everyone was sitting down. My father was almost smiling. They had purchased a house for Stella, put down a deposit, handled the paperwork. And then my father turned to me and said they'd need me to take over the monthly mortgage payments. I stood there for about 4 seconds. I already paid for everything else, I said. I'm not doing this. My mother started to say something about family. My father said, You don't have a husband or children, Maya. What exactly are you carrying? I picked up my keys from the table. I left. The call started the next day. Then the texts, then relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, all delivering some version of the same message. Family helps family. I read every one of them. I didn't respond to any of them. What I did instead was quieter. I went back through 4 years of bank statements. I pulled transfer confirmations, receipts, invoices. I organized everything into a folder by date and KS. Tagore, I contacted a lawyer. I told her the full picture. She listened without interrupting. And when I was done, she said, They have no case. But if they file, make sure you bring all of this. They filed. The suit claimed $350,000. A figure my lawyer later confirmed was calculated to cover the shortfall on Stella's house, dressed up in legal language about parental investment and support. I blocked every family number the day the papers arrived. Then I went back to my studio and made a mug. The night before the hearing, I was at my workbench late. The studio was dark except for the light over the shelf, where I keep the chipped ones. The mismatched mugs I've never been able to let go of. I looked at them for a long time. I thought about how I'd kept every broken thing, believing something about them was still worth holding. And I wondered for just a moment whether I'd done the same thing with my family, whether what I'd called loyalty had just been an inability to put something down. I didn't have a clean answer. I went to bed. The next morning, I put on a plain gray blazer and drove to the courthouse. The hearing didn't last as long as I expected. My lawyer presented the records in order. Transfers to Stella's account, legal fee payments, rent, utilities, groceries, the pediatrician bill, 4 years of transactions, documented, time-stamped, totaling just over $22,000. Not counting the hours, not counting the drives, not counting any of it that couldn't be receipted. My father's lawyer tried to reframe it as voluntary gifts. My lawyer pointed out that the suit itself claimed financial dependency, and that the evidence showed I had never been dependent on my parents. I had been, in practice, a financial contributor to their household and Stella's for years. The judge asked Stella directly whether she believed Maya had an obligation to continue supporting her. Stella didn't look at me. She looked at the table and said she thought it made sense because I had no children and no husband. There was a silence in that room that I will remember for a long time. The judge's response was measured but clear. She said that the absence of a spouse or children does not constitute a financial obligation to relatives. She said the records demonstrated a pattern of generosity, not dependency. She said the claim was not only without legal merit but reflected a misunderstanding, or a deliberate misrepresentation, of the actual financial dynamic in this family. Case dismissed. She called their conduct disappointing. That was the word she used. Disappointing. My father stared at the table. My mother had her hand over her mouth. Stella gathered her things without looking up. I walked out into the hallway and stood there alone for a moment, and the thought that came wasn't, I won. It was quieter than that. It was, did I just lose my entire family? I stood with that for a few seconds, and then I realized I hadn't lost anything that was ever really mine. Here's what I know now. The people who use you quietly are often the ones who've told themselves a story about what you're for. In that story, your stability is a resource. Your independence is an excuse. Your love is a line item. You can spend years trying to rewrite their story by doing more, giving more, hoping more. Or you can close the book. The cruelest thing about being treated as the fallback is that walking away feels like abandonment. Even when you're the only one who is ever really showing up, they thought I was the fallback. Until I stopped catching them entirely. I want to ask you something before you go. Have you ever been the one in your family who gave quietly, without a ledger, without demanding recognition, and still ended up as the villain when you finally said no? Leave your story in the comments. I read them. Everyone. If this hit something real for you, hit the like button. It takes 2 seconds and it means more than you think. And subscribe if you haven't already. There are more stories like this one coming. I'll see you in the next one.